Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast for people who read rock and roll books and watch music docs like it's a religion. For those who believe liner notes are literature and music history is sacred ground, this next 15 minutes is for you. I'm your host, Big Rick, and this week I've found us a great new book about the most sought-after record that was never released by someone most in the rock and roll community call a genius. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. And today the spotlight falls on the book Smile, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson by David Leaf. All right, is Brian Wilson a genius? If that's debatable, I offer you up the first 7 pages of this book. The first 7 pages of Smile, The Rise and Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson are filled with eye-popping quotes from huge talent in rock and roll, the top of the top: Paul McCartney, Bob Dylan, George Martin, Elton John, Tom Petty, Lindsey Buckingham, Roger Daltrey, who said that Wilson was the equivalent of Mozart and Beethoven and Bach. Neil Young said he was like Mozart or Chopin. Questlove called him the modern-day Stravinsky. Art Garfunkel said he was the Mozart of rock and roll. I mean, I know Brian Wilson was talented. The early Beach Boys run of like 62 through 66 produced a crazy amount of great songs. But Mozart and Beethoven? And a big reason for these crazy comparisons and these nonstop accolades and what this book is about is the Smile album. It was the album that was created in the late 60s and never released. And the story, with this much depth and wonder and archival research to put it together, definitely needs an authority figure to get it right. And author David Leaf is that guy. He is the foremost Beach Boys historian. I don't think anyone else could capture this enormous undertaking. He is an award-winning writer who has written about the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, and the Smile record for a long time. He published the book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth, in 1978. He put together the documentary Beautiful Dreamer about the first time Wilson played Smile live. And over the years, Leaf has developed a friendship with Brian Wilson. Smile was the album set to follow the groundbreaking Pet Sounds. It got a ton of hype, as everybody was wondering what was Brian Wilson up to next. Could he top Pet Sounds? Release dates came and went. Record sleeves were even printed, but it never came out. And the question of what happened to it turned into kind of a myth. It created a ton of bootlegs, weird bootlegs, sometimes bootlegs featuring songs that weren't even on the record. And Smile became this albatross that Brian Wilson carried for years. And what David Leaf did with this book is he put together an oral history that makes sure to look at every angle, every story, some rumors, and a ton of different views on a subject, the legendary Smile record, that people have obsessed on for years. And Leaf did something with his presentation that really worked. He placed narration between the quotes, and he's a really good writer that interjects scenarios and sets up certain things. It helped when reading this for me, and it really lent itself to the flow of the book, and it provided much needed context behind this massive story, and a ton of ground is covered in this book. I'm really glad that he put it together like that. Leaf, though, did have an inside advantage. He knew Brian Wilson personally for most of his life, and to consider him an expert on the Beach Boys would not be an understatement. Probably one of the most knowledgeable people on the subject. So when he speaks, it's very researched, it's very thorough in his presentation. His friendship with Brian also lends itself to some real intimate moments in the book that you just don't get to see from most authors' writings. And the pages are full of accounts from him talking to Brian, different band members, fans even, critics, pretty much anyone that played a part with a Smile record in any way. So the story is told through the voices of those who were there, with Leaf guiding the narrative and forming the context as the story goes along. 90 pages in, Leaf says, if you're feeling exhausted at this moment, you should be. I definitely was. There's so much to digest here, so many different angles to the story, so many different people, so many different things. It's a massive project that doesn't really have a definitive truth to it. So there's a lot to explore. After Leaf delivered how the album was made, what happened to it, why it didn't come out, and how that affected Brian Wilson and those around him, he looked at how Wilson was able to pretty much pick up the pieces of his life and move forward into the future with this Smile record always being something that was asked about. So fast forward almost 40 years later, how do you even begin to take this kind of collection of songs, some unfinished, some scraps, but still considered a masterpiece, and somehow turn it into something that can be performed live? And that's where the book goes next. It's this build up to Brian Wilson agreeing to put together the Smile record, to take a look at it again and come back and actually play it live. And we're not just talking about anyone here. This is Brian Wilson, and you're asking him to go back and face the music, literally the same music that in a lot of ways nearly destroyed him. He didn't want to do it. He had zero interest. And honestly, really, who could blame him? To even get him to consider it, it took a small handful of people, incredibly sensitive and patient, who understood not just his genius, but the trauma behind the genius. Brian Wilson was 24. Van Dyke Parks, his writing partner at the time, was 23 when they made the Smile record. And it was a record so ambitious, it nearly destroyed them. And this book does an incredible job at taking a very thorough look at the genius, the collapse, and the unthinkable comeback. The fact that they shelved the album in 1967 and didn't pick it back up till 2003, that alone is wild. And yeah, the book runs a little long in places, but who cares? By the end, you're just floored. Not just by Brian's talent, but by the team around him who made Smile happen. It's not just a comeback story, it's a resurrection. What was once Brian Wilson's most devastating setback became his greatest victory. And with the guidance of author David Leaf, we get to witness the resurrection of a broken dream and its return to the spotlight. Smile, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson by David Leaf runs 352 pages, and it's a tremendous read. Let's take a step back now and look if there are any questions that stand out after reading this. It's something I like to call the one big question. What is the one big question that stood out to me after I closed the book and put it down? I knew that Brian Wilson eventually played Smile record live. So why did I, knowing exactly how the story ends, still find myself rooting for him like the ending was still unwritten? Before I jump into this week's one big question, I need to sneak in a little book buzz and documentary news for you. There are 3 new titles announced that are standing out head and shoulders over the others, and I wanted to make sure you hear about these. The first one is a real surprise. I did not hear anything about this memoir, and I'm kind of shocked, but extremely stoked to read it. And that is a book called Uncool. It's the memoir of Cameron Crowe. And Crowe is such an icon in rock and roll journalism. And of course, the writer of probably the film that people tell me is their all-time favorite the most, and that's Almost Famous. And it just might be my personal favorite too. Crowe also wrote Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He was interviewing the Allman Brothers and Led Zeppelin in his teens for Rolling Stone. The anticipation for this is off the charts, and it comes out, it's going to make us wait a little bit on this one. It comes out November 4th, The Uncool. Great Lester Bangs reference there for those of you who have seen Almost Famous. Next up that I want to tell you about is another title I never thought I would see, especially since the artist passed away a few years ago, and that is Robbie Robertson, who teams up here with Martin Scorsese on a new book called Insomnia. Robertson lost his band, Scorsese lost his marriage, and then Robbie Robertson moved in with Martin Scorsese, and 4 decades of wild, culture-defining collaborations followed. If it's anything like Robinson's memoir Testimony, this book is going to rock. I think it's got a ton of potential. This is another November book. It's going to take a while before it comes out. This one comes out November 11th. And if you need a good rock doc to check out, this one releases May 30th, so it's coming up. It's Bono's documentary called Bono, Stories to Surrender, and it's taken from his one-man show he did where he told stories from his memoir and sang a bunch of songs that were featured in the book. They're going to launch an expanded edition of the book the same day. Did anybody read that Bono memoir that came out called Surrender? I really liked it. Bono's writing in that was a little different than most. He wrote kind of in a poetic way, covered a lot of ground about his philanthropy, and of course, ton of great U2 stories. My review's in the archives. I had to go way back to look at this one. It's episode 17, so if you want to check it out and what I thought of that, you can go back in and find that. And if you want more up-to-date news like this, my monthly newsletter, the Rock Talk Studio Blast, is packed with the hottest book buzz, exclusive documentary updates, and the current top 5 list. It's your VIP pass to what books and docs are coming out. It comes out only once a month, the last Friday of every month. The subscriptions right now are free. To get that sent to you, just send me an email at info@rocktalkstudio.com and say, Big Rick, send me over that blast. So let's dig into this week's one big question. I knew the ending of the story. So how did it work? How did this build up make me so interested in this book? And that's really, to me, the magic of this book. Even when you know how the story ends, you're still rooting like hell that he makes it. You still want Brian Wilson to succeed. But here's the sneaky thing about the book. Woven into this massive story that spanned over 35 years is a story about a very troubled guy, a young man. Remember, he was just 24, and he fell under so much pressure. It negatively affected him for most of his life. Most of his whole life was affected by this one record not coming out, and this creation that he made. That's really all it was. He just made a bunch of songs, but there was so much heaped on him. And the triumph celebrated and documented in this book of Brian Wilson actually performing live was very touching. It was a great culmination of the story. The author, David Leaf, did a wonderful job of not letting his friendship get in the way of presenting the hardship that was overcome in this. I really got wrapped up in the story. I was really hoping during all the build up to it, if he was going to actually do it. The book documents how he was feeling even minutes before he took the stage of that first performance. And the build up to that was he might not even play this show. I was rooting for him. And to me, that's a sign of a really good book. There is a lot to like here. And if you like Brian Wilson and if you like the Beach Boys, it's a must. And even if you don't, if you're a rock and roll historian and really want to dig into this story, this book gives you a lot to think about and a lot to dig into. One more thing I want to tell you about before I tease next week's Spotlight title, and it's a book, a great new coffee table style book that was just released. It's called Queen and the Night at the Opera 50 Years. It looks at 50 years of Queen's triumphant album, the one that broke them, the one that has Bohemian Rhapsody on it, and I've got 2 copies to give away. How cool is that? And all you've got to do to win, it's totally free, is just send me an email and sign up for the Rock Talk Studio Blast. U.S. residents only on the giveaway. So just send me over an email and I'll put you in the drawing for this great Queen book, Queen and the Night at the Opera, 50 Years. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I love talking rock and roll with you, and I'm sure you can gather I really enjoyed this book, so I highly suggest you check it out. Next week's show is also a book recommendation about a band member of someone mentioned in this show. He was a band member with someone mentioned in this show, someone whose testimony is featured in the book. All right, folks, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll catch you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.